Why are we still, despite the years of evidence mounting up on this issue, why are we still so uncomfortable talking about this issue and accepting the fact that there is a hugely disproportionate number of British South Asian Muslim men involved in what can only be described as a despicable crime? The fact is that since 2011, these sorts of crimes have occurred in cities up and down the country. They are spreading. They have occurred in Rochdale, Rotherham, Oxford, Telford, Leeds, Birmingham, Norwich, Burnley, High Wycombe, Leicester, Dewsbury, Middlesbrough, Peterborough, Bristol, Halifax and Newcastle. And in only 2 of those cases I've just listed from all of those cities were the men not of British South Asian Muslim heritage. All of the victims in all of those cities that I just listed, the list was very long. All of the victims except 3 were white teenage girls. And so the fact that this pattern, that the fact that 84% of these cases involve British South Asian Muslim men must beg the question, why? And if we are not asking the question why, then somebody else, I can assure you, will be asking the question why, and has been asking the question why. And then you sit back and then you wonder, and people like me sit back and wonder from my own communities, oh, why is the far right rising? I'll tell you, when you silence those liberal, secular, humanist and reasonable voices who are attempting to have a rational conversation around facts, when you silence those voices, when you call those voices anti-Muslim, Islamophobic or bigoted or racist, like Sarah Champion, who's a female member of the Labour Party, for goodness sake. When you silence those voices, and when the moderate voices are intimidated from speaking up, what happens as a result is that the fringes, the extremists, who don't want to be silent by definition because they shout the loudest because they're extremists, then those extremist voices rise to the forefront. And that is the consequence of those do-gooders who are attempting to be politically correct, who are attempting in name to defend people like me. When they silence this conversation, they are, I'll tell you right now, intellectually my worst enemies. Because when they silence the reasonable voices in the middle who are attempting to have this conversation in a decent way, when they call those voices racist or anti-Muslim or bigoted for trying to have this conversation, and they claim they're defending people like me, it's people like me who end up being spat at in the streets by the neo-Nazis, or who end up being attacked and mowed over outside mosques because the extreme fringes are taking over, the wingnuts, what I call the triple threat from the far left, the far right and from the heavens above, the Islamist theocrats. These are the only beneficiaries from trying to stifle and silence that conversation, that reasonable conversation that needs to occur around what are clearly facts. And those who are generally the ones who advocate a fear of having this conversation due to racism generally tend to be on the political left. Let me remind them, they are incredibly critical of the Trumponian notion of alternative facts. And yet, with this case, why are we ourselves inventing an alternative reality and in denial of what are quite clearly the facts? And the facts are the following. Be ready for this. In the United Kingdom, 7% of the country, roughly, are of South Asian heritage. Not all of those are Muslim, by the way. So let's say about 5% of those may well be British South Asian Muslim. Then, of course, half that, because 50% of them are women, that means 2.4% of this country, 2.4% of this country are British South Asian Muslim men. And yet 84% of collective child grooming and rape cases involve that 2.5% demographic.